The Mercy of Thorne Bellamy. A short story by Misty Hamilton Smith. Copyright 2025. All rights reserved. Greystone Hollow kept rules, the way prayer books keep promises, quietly, reverently, and with the weight of generations. Not laws. Those were etched into courthouse stone and left to gather dust, forgotten by all but the mice. The real rules lived. In the hush between words, passed from mother to daughter over dough, murmured from husband to wife beneath fog-heavy quilts while lamplight flickered with uneasy patience. The first rule pressed against every tongue: never pass the clock tower after midnight. They said the cobbles remembered, echoing footsteps long after the walker was gone. The second rule was gentler, but no less binding. Never ask the baker about his missing son. His flour-dusted hands would tremble, and the loaves would taste bitter for weeks. And the final rule, spoken with the reverence of funeral prayer: never speak to Thorne Bellamy. He came every third Thursday, just before dusk painted the village in amber and ash. His carriage was blacker than ink and the spaces between stars, its wheels rolling with the inevitability of a funeral march. The horses moved like ghosts, their breath steaming in the hollow's perpetual chill. His top hat sat pristine on his angular head. No dust dared settle there. His pocket watch, damned and precise, ticked louder than the church bell, louder than any human heartbeat. A metronome for time, he claimed alone. His spy-glasses were brass, burnished to a mirror shine that reflected intention more than light. They hung from a chain-like judgment, made visible, cruel, deliberate, and unblinking. When he peered through them, villagers swore their secrets unraveled. Shame catalogued in whatever ledger lurked behind his pale, calculating gaze. He never paid, neither coin nor courtesy nor explanation. He never smiled. His mouth was a blade, built for cutting words, not curving them. He offered no reason for his presence, no hint of purpose, only the peculiar weight that followed him like the scent of turned earth. The villagers called him the collector, not merely for what he took, though rumors whispered of that too, but because he never returned what was given. Borrowed time, stolen glances, confessions spoken too close to his silence. All vanished into the void of his coat pockets and were never seen again. So when he stepped into the apothecary on the eve of the frost festival, when the air held its breath and the walls leaned in to listen, no one expected kindness. Curtains twitched. Saints' names were murmured, worn smooth by generations of fear. Least of all did anyone expect kindness for Elsie. She was new, fresh as morning dew, and twice as foolish, the baker's wife had whispered. No one had warned her properly. The warning should have carried weight, consequence, history, but the villagers assumed someone else would speak, just as one assumes another will tend the ember until the house is ash. The bell above the door gave a reluctant chime, its brass tongue striking with the hesitation of a child forced to speak. The sound lingered longer than physics allowed, as if the apothecary's air had thickened to honey in memory. Thorne entered as if winter had taken shape. His coat swept the floor like silk, whispering on wood, his boots silent despite their weight. The scent that followed him was layered. Leather and brass polish, yes, but beneath it, the odor of turned. Pages of secrets soured by time, of promises curdled into threats. Elsie's nostrils flared before she could stop them. The apothecary seemed to contract around him. Shelves of glass jars and dried herbs, once familiar, felt suddenly exposed. A jar of dried violets sat high on the shelf, forgotten, brittle, their color faded to memory. Elsie had never used them. She wasn't sure why she kept them. Even the labels, newly penned in Elsie's careful hand after her arrival, blurred in his presence, as if his presence disrupted the certainty of language itself. Elsie looked up from the ledger, ink-stained fingers still curled around the quill. Candlelight caught the threads of her rust-coloured scarf, the one that had belonged to her brother. She would not speak his name here. The air had thickened around Thorne, and even the jars seemed to whisper that names were offerings best withheld. "Good evening," she said, her voice steady, despite the quickening pulse at her throat. Thorne tilted his head with a motion precise as clockwork, mechanical as the gears grinding in the tower above. Through his spyglasses, his eyes remained unreadable, pale as a winter sky. "Is it?" he asked. The question, spare as it was, landed with the weight of a verdict. Something sharp kindled in Elsie's chest, not fear, though that would have been reasonable, but a dangerous curiosity. The same curiosity that had brought her here in the first place, that had led her to accept work in an apothecary where the previous assistant had vanished one October morning. "I suppose that depends on your intentions," she said, and startled at the steadiness of her own boldness. He studied her with the intensity of a naturalist examining an unfamiliar specimen. Silence stretched between them like a blade. Candle flames danced in their glass chimneys, and even the arbs seemed to lean closer, as if bearing witness to something unprecedented. "Valerian root," he said at last, his voice low, measured, carrying the cadence of a funeral dirge. "Belladonna, the strong kind." Elsie's hand stilled on the ledger. She had prepared that combination before, but never for someone who named it with such casual precision. "That's a dangerous mix," she said, watching for any flicker of expression across his face. "And yet," Thorne replied, spreading his gloved hands in a gesture both elegant and ominous, "I am still standing." The fire crackled behind her, shadows dancing across the walls like spectres at a funeral. Sweat gathered at the nape of her neck despite the chill that clung to Greystone Hollow like breath. "You'll need to sign the ledger," she said. The words didn't just land, they challenged. The stillness that followed was surgical, precise, deliberate, waiting. The kind of silence held before an incision, before salvation or damnation took shape. Thorne's spyglasses caught the candlelight and threw it back in shards. For a moment, Elsie wondered if she had asked too much of a man who gave nothing freely. Then, impossibly, improbably, like snow falling upward, Thorne reached into his coat. His movements were deliberate, practiced, rehearsed in the privacy of thought. He withdrew a silver fountain pen etched with symbols that stung the eye, and approached the ledger like a man signing his own death warrant. Thorne Bellamy for Elsie. The ink glowed faintly in the candlelight, darker than black, permanent as ink pressed into skin. Her name, rendered in his precise hand, shimmered with a finality that felt ritualistic. Elsie stared at the signature and felt the world tilt beneath her feet. "Why?" she began, then stopped, swallowed, and tried again. Her voice emerged smaller than intended, but no less brave. "Why, for me?" Without a word, he placed a velvet pouch on the counter between them. The fabric was deep purple, the color of bruises, of twilight, of endings. It made no sound as it touched the wood. Inside, nestled like secrets in silk, lay 3 items. 1. Silver coin that caught light like moonbeams, a pressed violet too perfect for nature, and a folded note that pulsed with its own quiet heartbeat. She set the violet beside the ledger, its color refusing to fade where ink had already darkened. Elsie's fingers trembled as she unfolded the paper. The The words, written in that same precise script, didn't just burn into memory, they branded it. You were brave. Don't be again. Thorne Bellamy had not always been a villain. Once, he was a boy with a telescope and a pocket full of questions. The telescope, brass and dented, had come from a grandfather who built clock towers and believed in clarity. Young Thorne dragged it to the manor's highest window, pressing his eye to the lens until red rings bloomed around his socket, scanning the fog-shrouded hills for anything that might explain the weight pressing down on Greystone Hollow like a curse. He lived in a manor with too many rooms and not enough warmth. Corridors stretched endlessly, echoing with his footsteps and the tick of clocks that never agreed. Dust motes danced in grey light that filtered through windows too large for comfort. The air held its breath, waiting for something that never came. The walls bore portraits of ancestors whose eyes followed him with quiet disapproval, faces frozen in perpetual disappointment. His father collected secrets, speaking in whispers, trading in currencies without names. He vanished for days, returning with new ledgers, fresh debts, and shadows deepening beneath his eyes. When he looked at Thorne, it was with the gaze of a man appraising an investment, measuring potential against the certainty of disappointment. Thorne learned early. Questions were unwelcome. Curiosity was a luxury his bloodline could not afford. His mother was a whisper in the wallpaper, there and not there, present in the rustle of silk skirts around corners, in the lavender that lingered in empty rooms. She had been beautiful once, Thorne supposed, though her portraits showed only a pale woman with hollow eyes, always on the verge of vanishing. She spoke in fragments, half-sentences trailing into sighs, her hands fluttering like wounded birds when he tried to hold them. At 16, Thorne found a journal in the attic. It was hidden behind a trunk of moth-eaten christening gowns and baptismal certificates for children who had never drawn breath. The leather binding was soft with age, the pages yellowed but intact. It smelled of herbs, ink, and something indefinably feminine. It had belonged to a woman named Elspeth, an apothecary who had vanished from Greystone Hollow decades ago, her name now spoken only in whispers. Her notes were meticulous, written in a hand so precise it bordered on mechanical. Each formula was recorded with scientific rigor, every grain measured, every effect catalogued by someone who understood that lives hung in the balance of milliliters and mercy. Her sketches were haunting, anatomical renderings that revealed not just bone and sinew, but the places where sorrow pooled, where guilt settled like sediment in the soul. As Thorne read deeper, he began to understand. Elspeth had been more than an apothecary. She was a keeper of mercy, dispensing not just potions, but absolution. Redemption was her currency, and the villagers brought their darkest confessions alongside their coin. Her final entry read, "If mercy is a mistake, let me make it again." The words burned into Thorne's retinas, echoing through the hollow chambers of his chest where warmth should have lived. He traced the line with his finger until the ink responded, darkening beneath the oil of his skin, as if recognizing its air. He read that line nightly for a year. The journal became his companion, its weight as familiar as his own heartbeat. He carried it through the manor's echoing halls, whispering its final sentence like a liturgy. The words became a mantra, a question, a quiet rebellion. He began to understand. Mercy was not weakness, but courage. Kindness, not folly, but a revolution whispered instead of shouted. But understanding and practice are different creatures. One lives in the mind, the other demands sacrifice. He learned that mercy, to survive, must be hidden or hardened. It began with a boy no older than he had been when Elspeth vanished. Thorne caught him in the tower one dusk, fingers trembling as they closed around a gear small enough to pocket. "Please," the boy whispered, eyes wide with hunger and fear. "It's only brass. My sister needs bread." The plea struck something soft in Thorne, something he had not yet buried. He let the boy go, his own voice low and measured. "Take nothing more. Mercy is not endless." But mercy was repaid with betrayal. Weeks later, the tower's heartbeat faltered. Bells that should have warned the hollow of a storm remained silent, their gears stripped bare. The boy had returned under cover of night, selling the stolen pieces for coin. A villager died when the warning never came, caught in floodwaters that mercy had made possible. Thorne stood in the wreckage, the drowned man's name echoing against the journals he still read, and understood. Compassion without calculation was ruin. From that night forward, he read Elspeth's words, not as guidance, but as caution. Each page became a warning, each formula a reminder that softness could kill. Then he stopped reading. He began to collect. The transformation came gradually, like frost creeping across a window pane. The boy who once searched the hills with a telescope now watched villagers through his father's spyglasses, cataloguing weakness, secrets, and debt. Hands that once turned pages with reverence now turned keys with precision, locking away mercy like contraband. The heart that once ached for Elspeth's kindness hardened, measuring worth in ledger entries and dispensing judgment with cold precision. He kept the journal, hid it where his father's disapproval couldn't reach, and his mother's whispered disappointments couldn't touch. And sometimes, in the deepest hours of night, when even the clocks held their breath, he remembered that final line and felt something stir in his chest, regret, longing, or the ghost of the boy he had been. In the days after Thorne's visit, the apothecary grew heavy with silence. His signature in the ledger seemed to darken with each passing hour, and the violet beside it refused to fade. Elsie felt the weight of questions pressing against her ribs, urging her beyond the shop's narrow walls. In the days after Thorne's visit, the apothecary grew heavy with silence. His signature in the ledger seemed to darken with each passing hour, and the violet beside it refused to fade. Elsie felt the weight of questions pressing against her ribs, urging her beyond the shop's narrow walls. Elsie left Greystone Hollow the morning after Thorne's visit. Frost clinging to cobblestones like scattered diamonds, fog low enough to swallow her steps. No one saw her go. The villagers stayed shuttered behind curtains, nursing unease like a collective hangover. Only the ravens on the clock tower's iron railings watched, black eyes tracking her as she pulled her rust-coloured scarf tight and vanished into the mist. The apothecary did not change. It remained frozen in the moment of her departure. The ledger lay open on the counter, his signature dark as spilled blood on cream. Thorne Bellamy. For Elsie, the ink did not fade. It deepened with each passing day, as if fed by something more than time. The pressed violet stayed beside it, defiant, imperishable. Even the candle wicks held their shape, unburned, waiting. The villagers whispered, of course. They said the apothecary was cursed now, its air thick with unfinished business. The villagers spoke in hushed tones, as if her absence had unbalanced something sacred. They avoided the apothecary's windows, crossed the street without looking. Some claimed they saw candlelight flicker inside, though no flame had been lit. Children dared each other to peer through its windows, but courage always failed at the threshold. The more superstitious claimed they smelled lavender and regret seeping through the cracks. But Elsie was already gone. 3 months passed like breath held too long. During those months away, Elsie sought refuge in Bellwether Hall, where the hollow's forgotten records slept beneath velvet dust, guarded by those who dared not to reveal her presence. She had left the apothecary the morning after Thorne's visit. carrying with her the memory of a tulip jar she had relabeled, its brittle tag now bearing the name Elspeth, the violet from his pouch, too perfect to be natural, and the folded note whose warning refused to leave her. You were brave. Don't be again. The echo between them gnawed at her, too sharp to ignore. Answers would not be found among jars and powders, so she locked herself in the archives, tracing Elspeth's formulas line by line until the days blurred into months. When Elsie returned, she was no longer the wide-eyed shop girl who once measured powders with trembling hands. She walked the cobbled streets with the measured stride of someone who had looked into mirrors that revealed more than faces, someone who had touched books that bled secrets onto her ink-stained fingers. Her scarf was still rust-coloured and threadbare, but now it hung not as armour against cold, but as a banner of quiet defiance. The villagers noticed, of course. Whispers followed her rust-coloured scarf as it trailed through the hollow streets. They said she had gone into exile and returned with shadows clinging to her eyes. Some crossed themselves when she passed. Others turned away as if her gaze might reveal too much. Children watched from doorways, hushed by parents who claimed the apothecary girl had come back, touched by something older than Mercy. Yet none dared approach. The silence that had haunted the apothecary now walked beside her, and the hollow held its breath. She had transformed, not in appearance, though her eyes held new depths, but in purpose. Where curiosity once led, certainty now moved through her like a current. She carried herself like a scholar, one who had wintered in the hushed archives of Bellwether Hall, breathing dust that tasted of centuries-old secrets, tracing genealogies that rewrote everything she thought she knew. The archives had been revelation, wrapped in velvet and shadow. Ancient tomes, bound in leather soft as skin, yielded their secrets to her patient hands. She decoded Elspeth's formulas line by line, her fingers tracing faded ink across pages that pulsed with their own heartbeat. Each entry was a breadcrumb leading deeper into a labyrinth of bloodlines and inherited gifts, of power passed like a tended flame. The knowledge did not rest quietly in her hands. It pressed against her ribs, demanding reckoning. If Thorne carried Elspeth's inheritance, then the hollow silence was no longer hers to bear alone. Answers in ink were not enough. She needed to see him, to measure the weight of that legacy in his eyes. On a Thursday evening, as the sun began its descent, she climbed the clock tower. The spiral staircase groaned beneath her each step, echoing like an amplified heartbeat. The air thinned as she ascended, dense with brass polish and old shadows, until she reached his sanctuary. Thorne stood with his back to her, adjusting the tower's ancient gears with the precision of a surgeon operating on time itself. His coat hung immaculate despite the cramped quarters, his top hat angled with geometric exactness. Metal rang against metal like a funeral bell, each movement deliberate as prayer. "You knew," she said. Her voice filled the tower with the weight of winter nights, candlelit pages, and truths exhumed from centuries of silence. Thorne turned at last. Through his spyglasses, something flickered in his pale eyes. Not regret, not relief, but something that lived in the space between. "Because Mercy is a mistake," he said again. Each word weighed with the precision she once reserved for dangerous mixtures. Elsie stepped closer, close enough to breathe the scent that clung to him. Leather, brass, and secrets kept too long in darkness. "You're not just a villain," she said. "You're the formula." Thorne's mouth curved, something like a smile, if it held any warmth. "No," he said, his spyglasses catching the dying light and throwing it back in shards. "I am the system." She reached into her coat, her movements as careful as his had been that night in the apothecary. From her pocket she withdrew a vial no larger than her thumb, its liquid catching light, and holding it, swirling with unnamed colors. "Then let's rewrite the inheritance," she said, offering it like a challenge, like a key to doors locked since Elspeth vanished into fog. Thorne took the vial with hands that trembled only slightly, examining it with the intensity of someone reading their own eulogy. The liquid responded to his touch, glowing faintly as if recognizing something familiar. Without a word, he slipped it into his coat pocket, where it joined the collection of secrets and small mercies he'd gathered for so long. Then, with a movement sudden as lightning and twice as shocking, he raised his cane and struck the clock face. The sound was tremendous. Glass shattered like crystallized screams, gears grinding to a halt with mechanical death rattles. The great hands froze mid-sweep, pointing to an hour that would never come again. Elsie did not flinch. She watched the glass fall like stars dying mid-burn, then turned and descended the spiral staircase, her steps steady, her scarf trailing like a comet's tail. Villagers say the clock tower never ticked after that evening. The great mechanism that once marked their days with inexorable rhythm fell silent. They navigated time now by sun, by stars, by the uncertain rhythms of their own hearts. Some say the violet carries a message, though no ink marks its petals. If mercy is a mistake, let it bloom again. And if you're brave enough to enter the old apothecary and ask for valerian root and belladonna, speaking the words clearly despite their taste of danger, you might find a violet on your doorstep the next morning, perfect, imperishable. A small revolution blooming in defiance of everything the world taught you about the impossibility of second chances. Thank you for listening to The Mercy of Thorne Bellamy, a short story by Misty Hamilton Smith. If this tale resonated with you, please like and share it with others who love stories woven with atmosphere and meaning. And don't forget to follow for more new stories, new voices, and new journeys awaiting.